The ocean connects every coastline and sustains all life on Earth. It powers economies, feeds communities, and drives climate resilience. And for the past decade, the world has come together to protect it. One continent at a time, the movement has spread across the globe. Now, for the first time, our ocean comes to Africa.
Welcome to Kenya.
Part of the reason why people from the lakeside are actually quite intelligent is because fish is their staple food. I do not know how true that is, but today I'm sat with Dr. Rix, who will be telling us more about, this industry, the fishery industry. So Dr. Rix, karibu sana. Yeah, I wanted to catch you. I wanted to see if you know Swahili. You can quickly tell people who you are, what you do before we dive in.
Yeah, I'm Christina Hicks. I'm a professor at Lancaster University in the UK. I'm British and Kenyan, so I do also have my roots here. I work on fisheries governance and conservation, so the sustainability aspect, but I also work on food justice and nutrition, so the bits of fish that add to our intelligence. And then I work on the politics of fisheries finance as well. And I'm here at the moment doing research, but also for the Our Ocean conference in Mombasa next week, and with Oceana, which is an organization I'm on their board.
I'd really love to know what that industry looks like for a woman especially.
Oh, okay. That's a really nice place to start, actually, because I guess for me, actually, the first Kenyan marine scientist I met was a woman. So, and a very impressive woman, Dr. Nyawera Muthaiga. So initially I didn't question the role of women in this industry or in this field. Especially early on, if you look at that kind of when people first start entering the career, when you're doing your PhD, there's a lot of women present. But then as we progress through the career stage, women begin to drop out. And then particularly, if you go to, I've worked in the UK, in Australia and America, there it's particularly Black women who are really underrepresented. So I was involved in quite a lot of initiatives early on, trying to improve the representation on women. So trying to increase maternity policies or parental policies, so both for dads and mums, trying to bring recognition to the biases that are present in hiring processes, and just really shift the culture around the role of women. And also, I guess, for my career personally, I made sure that I remembered those women, those powerful women mentors were out there. So like Dr. Nyawera Muthaiga, but other people like Dr. Ife from South Africa, from Nigeria, and other mentors out there that ground me and remind me that I do belong in this space.
I love that you have people who actually ground, that actually do their grounding. But is there any significant difference between, working in Africa, basically, and the Western region?
In terms of the gender balance?
Yeah.
I mean, not really. I think you will have, and I've seen this as kind of working back in the UK and trying to recruit PhD students and postdocs. Although when I worked here, I worked with many wonderful female researchers, you don't see the same number of women applying to the PhDs, and so getting the opportunities to progress through their career. So I think the challenge is those women who enter the field and are interested in it, how can we keep them and support their career progression? And I think that challenge is the same here as it is anywhere in the world.
Paint me a picture of what a resilient food ecosystem looks or is supposed to look like for Africa?
That's a really big question, so I'll try and try and give you an answer. And then I'll try and make sure that I bring fish back in, because fish is what's really, well, it has a really important role, but it's what I'm passionate about. So a resilient food system, or I guess some work that I've been recently working on is trying to understand a resilient but also a just food system and a healthy food system. So a healthy food system is where everyone, regardless of their social identity, so women, men, youth, elderly, migrants, everyone can access a healthy diet. And we all know what a healthy diet is. You know, it has lots of whole grains, has lots of vegetables, it has fruit, it has some meat or animal source foods, but not too much. And that's where fish comes in, because fish is a really healthy source of animal source food. It has a lower environmental footprint, so it can be more sustainable than red meat. And also it doesn't have some of the health implications, the negative health implications that eating a lot of red meat has. So everyone has to have access to that kind of a diet. And by access, I mean it has to be affordable. The salaries that we get has to be enough for everyone to be able to access those foods locally in their markets. And I think here in Africa, we're really lucky because a lot of the healthy foods are grown here, or they're fished here, or they're produced here. But there is a tendency for us to import a lot of food as well, a lot of food that has lower nutritional value, that's perhaps ultra-processed, and it's really heavily marketed to us. So that kind of squeezes out our African diets that really is what the world is trying to come back to eat. So that's the healthy side, that's the accessible side. For it to be resilient, this food system has to be produced in a way that does not put pressure on our environment and on our planet to make it unsafe. So when we talk about pressure of the food system, the first thing we think about these days is the climate impacts, because our food system emits 30% of carbon of our carbon emissions. So 30% of the drivers of climate change is because of the way globally we're producing and what we're eating. So the reduction in red meat has a real role to play, because red meat has really high carbon emissions. And that's why fish, again, is really a really good source, because its carbon emissions are lower. And if we can fish it sustainably, which is what our ocean conference and fisheries management and conservation is all about, and we know how to do that, we just need to make it happen, then it can be really resilient and support us. I think the last thing I'd say is I think our food system has to also be just. So it has to be accessible, it has to be affordable, but it has to be in an environment where we can make healthy choices and where everyone has the agency to decide what to eat, to decide how that food system is governed, and those are those things. So I think those are the three pieces that are, to me, a resilient food system.
To narrow it down here in Kenya as a country, are we, is the fishery or that, is it accessible? Is it just? Is it?
Yeah. So in terms of so if we look at the global scale, most of the world is quite a long way away from what a healthy diet is. But in Africa and in Kenya, we're much closer to what that is. But we're moving away from it. So what we need to do is make sure that we don't follow the same trajectories that other countries have followed into an unhealthy diet. And we can really kind of reinforce the healthy aspects of our lifestyle that we currently have. In terms of whether it's accessible, whether it's affordable at the moment, I mean, I think everywhere in the world, food prices are a problem. Unfortunately, that's being driven by other factors outside of our control, fuel prices, wars that are happening around the world. But the best way for us to protect our food system is not to be dependent on imports, because it's those imports that drive the price of food up. If we can invest in our African food systems, then we'll be more resilient to these food price shocks that are global and not domestic.
Can we sustain actually feeding ourselves off fish and exporting? Because not too long ago, the Cabinet Secretary Hassan Joho said that they wanted to increase the earnings of fish and the blue economy, basically from 30 billion to 450 billion, by 2030. That is pretty much 6 years, 5.5. It seems very ambitious, and I don't know if that's achievable.
That's a huge increase, and more than tenfold in just a few years. So I don't know if that's possible, but I would worry about any effort to follow that kind of a growth trajectory, because such rapid growth that depends on our natural resources is not going to be sustainable. And I imagine that growth, that blue economy growth strategy is from the fisheries, but also probably from other activities that would happen at sea, like oil and gas exploration, perhaps, opening up more ports. All of those activities have environmental impacts. So I would be very cautious about such an ambitious growth strategy because of, if it succeeds in delivering the economic benefits, I doubt it would be sustainable. And I would worry that the greatest impacts would be felt by the local communities, the coastal fisheries communities by the lake, but also along the oceans, who are really dependent on those resources, who perhaps, fish consumption in Kenya is not very high, actually. As a nation, we are well below the global average, and that's because people who are close to the coast or close to the lake eat a lot of fish, so it's really important for them. But most other Kenyans don't really eat a lot of fish, and that's fine. But if we pursued a strategy that undermined the supply of fish to those communities that do depend on fish a lot, then we're not just losing their livelihoods, we're going to lose the ability for them to nourish their children. And that's going to have knock-on implications, because the nutrients that are found in fish, and so those communities would then have to find the nutrients that they get from fish, which are these micronutrients. They're things we need in very small quantities. So, in fact, for like a child, to meet a third of your daily requirements of these micronutrients, 9 to 10 grams of dried fish is enough a day. So we're not talking about consuming very large volumes, but those nutrients are critical for healthy mental development, physical development. So although the economic contributions to those coastal communities may seem small, if you take away those nutrients, it's going to impact the life course of all of those children. They're not going to be able to grow and develop and contribute to the economy as much as they would. These micronutrients, so globally, the micronutrient deficiencies are really quite common. And there was a study that estimated that the micronutrient deficiencies that we're experiencing in Africa currently contribute to they impact GDPs by up to 11%. So we don't calculate the cost of that 9 grams of fish going to the child, but if we think about the economic losses of it not going to the child, that's quite significant.
You've interacted with the local community, I believe, from the coastal regions, especially here in Kenya. What are they ready? Are they ready to handle fish economically, especially? And by this I also mean adding value, not only selling the raw product, the fish, adding additives, canning, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So, in both our coastal communities, I know the ocean coast a lot better than the lake coast, but there are commonalities. We have always, both in Kenya, but also across Africa, dried our fish. And we dry that so that it can have a longer shelf life, so that it can be distributed across the continent in some cases, particularly in West Africa. And those drying practices are traditional, they are cheap, they're practices that communities themselves have developed and learned and passed down through generations. And they work. So the women know how to do that. They interact with the men, and there are effective systems. But there are still losses. So those drying, not all fish are dried. The drying practices themselves, moisture can enter into the drying process, and then you get wastage. So the solution to reducing the loss within so if the women if there's wastage, they'll lose money. But there are interventions that can improve the drying process, that can add to these processes that you're talking about. And the communities are very much ready for that. When I talk to coastal communities, they want training, they want to learn about these new technologies that they can use, because they see the losses every day. So I'd say yes, they're definitely ready.
And from what you're saying, fish seems to be very important and essential, yet it is quite overlooked. Is it a governance issue? Is it a social issue?
Yeah.
What's the problem?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why fish. I've been studying fish, working in fisheries all my life, so I don't understand why the incredible, I mean, Kenya has some incredible coral reefs. We have some of the oldest marine parks in the world. We've been protecting our coral reef habitats since the 70s. And that's fully protected. So we have like some real amazing success stories. We've got some amazing marine scientists in Kenya who've been doing this work over generations. We also have really thriving lakeside fisheries with strong export markets. And like I've been talking to you about, fish is really nutritious. Globally, fish, 3 billion people globally depend on fish as their primary source of animal protein. So that's, almost 3 billion.
Wow,
yeah. Small-scale fisheries, now forget about the industrial, just the small-scale fisheries supports almost 800 million livelihoods around the world. So you're right, we kind of overlook the oceans and freshwater, but we shouldn't, because it impacts people's lives every day.
I'd like to know, what role does the territorial markets as well as the local markets play in, delivering healthy, affordable foods? And in this instance, I'm talking about fish.
Yeah. So those territorial and local markets in our work, we've found them to be really critical for a number of reasons. So these are the territorial markets are the ones where essentially your small-scale or domestic or artisanal fish and food products are sold. So that's where very many people, particularly in rural areas, that's how they access their food. It's how the fishermen are able to sell their fish and gain money, but often the selling is done by women. It's the pathway through often these drying processes. So when some certain species of fish are caught periodically in very large quantities. So, for example, schooling fish like sardines and even omena, when people go out to catch them, they catch really large volumes. So then it's difficult to sell all of them straight away. So those are the fish that end up being dried, and those are the fish that are then sold through these territorial markets.
I keep thinking about places like Turkana, for example. We have people still dying of hunger there, and there's Lake Turkana. I don't know if it has fish. And so if it has fish, and just generally as a country, do you think when it comes to governance, there's transparency in terms of food security? Is it, or do we have gatekeepers in that industry?
Yeah, maybe let me answer that question in two ways, I think. So firstly, I don't know Turkana very well, but there definitely is fish in Lake Turkana. And I've worked in West Africa, in very rural, arid areas, which is pastoral often, and access to food security is a real challenge. And in those communities, the dried fish is often what's used in malnutrition clinics. In malnutrition clinics, when women come in with their babies and they are underweight, the advice they're given is just to crumble a small amount of fish into your rice or the food that you're giving your child, because that small amount of fish is really important for lifting you out of malnutrition. So in Lake Turkana, even though there may be problems with accessing other food sources, there are practices and advice that can be given that can really give a little bit of a boost. So it won't solve all the problems, but we can improve the chances of communities and children thriving there. I think the other aspect you talked about was governance and transparency. And within fisheries, here I'll take you, I think, to the coast. Transparency is a huge problem within fisheries. It's one of the key commitments that Oceana is pushing for at our Ocean Conference next week. So what we often have in our waters is we have many small-scale fishers and then we have many industrial fishers. And those industrial fishers may be Kenyan, but they may be coming from neighboring countries, or they may be coming from as far away as China or Spain or Japan. And we don't really have a good sense of who those vessels are owned by. And that's a problem, because if we don't know who's fishing, then it's very difficult to control how much they're fishing. And often they're given access, or some of these kind of vessels are given access through agreements between the government and between the governments. But the decisions that are made on those agreements are not very transparent. So we don't really know what fees were paid, how much is the government really getting. And in some research that's compared, and often African nations are at a disadvantage when they're negotiating these agreements. So there was some research that compared the licensing fee, the money that West African nations received for access to tuna off of their coastlines, and compared it to the EU, and compared it to what countries in the Pacific were getting for the access to tuna in their waters. And the Pacific Island countries have formed a coalition, so they negotiate as a bloc. And the price that they were able to get was many times more than the price the West African, Senegal in this case, was getting for exactly the same family of fish to exactly the same nation. So those access agreements, so I think the importance of improved transparency and the importance of probably partnerships, so that we can have more of a powerful negotiating positions when the government is making decisions about access to our resources.
I'm actually curious, how affordable and accessible is fish in the UK, as someone who's a champion for fish and with a family, as compared to Kenya?
In terms of affordability, so in the UK, fish is considered quite expensive. It's become a lot cheaper over recent years, but it's still an expensive type of food. But if I compare it to, so this is one of the real tragedies, I think, when it comes to fisheries, is if I compare it to Senegal, because I've done more work recently there. So in Senegal, you have lots of, the most commonly consumed fish there and caught there is sardine. It's a sardinella, it's a type of sardine. And it's often talked about as the food of the poor. It's very cheap, it's accessible, it's very nutritious. But recently, this sardinella has become a really critical ingredient in the aquaculture industry. So aquaculture farms in Norway, in Scotland, even in Chile, need this ingredient to feed their fish, which is called fish oil. So it's something that if you catch the sardinella and you ground it up and you extract the fish oil, the aquaculture industry really likes it, because then it stimulates the appetite of the salmon. So then the salmon grows much quicker and they can sell a lot more. So the price of fish has come down in the UK because the salmon industry has really taken off. But the price of sardinella in Senegal has gone up. So there's this real direct relationship between this cheap fish, locally eaten, it's part of the national dish. It's a World Heritage dish in Senegal, taboulien, is now becoming more and more scarce, whilst fish is becoming more and more affordable in Europe. So that kind of, and it's not an intentional effort to undermine food security in West Africa. It's just our food system is very complex, and if we're not tracing them, so back to the transparency, if we don't know where the fish oil is coming from, and the factories and the kind of fish aquaculture farms can't be sure that they're not coming from regions that are undermining food security, then we can't manage that dynamic.
When you talk about sustainability and food security, and just give me that picture, what do you envision for Africa if we were to do things right starting today, for example?
When it comes to food security and sustainability in the oceans in Africa, and this is 4 things, or these are 3 things that Oceana is pushing next week, and then I'm going to add my 4th one. So, and part of the purpose of this Our Ocean conference is to get leaders, many leaders, to agree to these commitments. So we're moving en masse. It's not just an individual country making a change on their own, but we're agreeing to these certain commitments. So the first one is to protect critical habitats. So we have done a really good job here in Kenya of protecting parts of our coral reef environments. Let's do more of that. We have a good track record. Let's keep going. The second one is really improving the transparency. So there are a number of initiatives. There's a number of initiatives, coalitions that are trying to really push governments to make these beneficial ownership lists available and accessible so that we can see not just who's fishing, but who owns the vessels that are fishing, and link that to accountability so that we can see what's happening, we can decide what management needs to happen, and we can enforce that management. The third one, which I haven't talked so much about, but I think is really critically important, is small-scale fisherfolk, the fishing communities that are most connected to the ocean, that have the most to lose from us mismanaging the ocean, that have the most knowledge about the ocean. Their voices really need to be central in these decision makings. They shouldn't just be kind of included, but they should be recognized and heard. And we need to spend a lot of time developing a better relationships, meaningful partnerships between the communities, the stewards, the traditional stewards of our environments, and the contemporary managers of our environments. And then the last one that I'll strip up myself, but we've talked a lot about, is I really want fish to be recognized as a critical source of nutrition, particularly for the most vulnerable, for our children, for our mothers who are pregnant or lactating, and for our governments to prioritize ensuring that the nation's nutritional needs are met before they go and make their export deal agreements. It's fine to export fish, but the first consideration should be, have we done what we need to do with our resources, and with what's left over, we can then export them. Those would be my four.
Okay. That's beautiful. Are we expecting to see any policies, agreements being signed by leaders? And are we expecting national leaders from here as well in the conference?
I very much expect so, yeah, both of those. I expect we'll see some leaders, and I expect we'll see some really strong commitments signed. So I think watch out. It'll be a very exciting week. It's the first time that Our Ocean Conference has been held on African soil. So the Our Ocean Conference, it's one of the biggest global gatherings of heads of world ocean leaders. So we'll have a lot of political figures there, but we'll have scientists and NGOs and actors also there. The theme this year is Our Ocean, Our Heritage, Our Future. And it's a real opportunity for Africa to lead, for us to show the world what needs to happen in terms of ocean leadership, and for the world to follow us. There are three key commitments that Oceana is really pushing for. So the first one on protecting critical habitats, which Kenya has a great history and track record in. The second one on improving fisheries and transparency, so that we can better govern and manage our oceans sustainably. So we know who's fishing, why they're fishing, and we can control their fishing. And the third one is really important, to center the voices of the fisherfolk who are most dependent on the oceans. Because some of the largest numbers of people who are dependent on the oceans come from the African continent. So having those voices front and center in this conference as well, I think is a real opportunity to elevate those voices.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hicks, for agreeing to speak to us before the conference. And thank you for schooling us. I've actually learned a lot, and I hope the viewer has as well.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Now we say kwaheri. I will see you on the next. I have been your host, Gashambi Nderitu.